Okay, we're live. Mind your P's and Q's. Yeah, we've got 3 people. No, it's not. 1, 2. Okay. Mind your P's and Q's. Oh no. So for those who are watching at home, for people at home.
Hi.
Where would you like it? Put it somewhere.
That'll do.
How's that?
Good. So good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I guess you've all done the refuge. Yes, so you've begun the session, so I've come part my way through. Okay, so today is the day we celebrating, this is continuing this celebration of the Sangha, and also being mindful of death and impermanence, but also you could say death and continuity. If death were the end, then actually there wouldn't ever even have been a beginning. That would just be like, conditions fall apart all the time. I mean, so what? But actually, there's continuity. There is actually some meaning to our life, to being in some kind of underlying reality to it all that has meaning. And that's why we're here, to discover what that is. What is that underlying nature of it all that has meaning? Because obviously when you see the conditions falling apart all the time, it doesn't have any meaning. And something inside us thinks, hang on, that's not right. There is meaning. And that's like what we're trying to discover, what we're awakening to. The intrinsic meaning of, if you like, life or experience or what we are or the nature of mind or our heart's wish or whatever we call it, ultimate reality, doesn't matter really, it's what you call it. There has to be something like that, and there's something in us that knows that. And so then, why do we talk then about death? Because first of all, it reminds us about what isn't the meaning. Everything that falls apart is not what it's about. So, okay, then you look at your life and you look at what you're busy with. It's like trying to hold it all together. But you're not trying to hold it together just for its own sake. You're holding it together for some meaning, some purpose, some deeper meaning. And it's important that we don't forget that, because you can become so busy doing the next thing, doing the next thing, doing the next thing. You know, oh, and that, and that, and that's good, and all that, and that, and that, and that. Death? Oh, forget it. You know, that's later. That's something else. I'm afraid you can't be so sure it's later. As I was saying, His Holiness Shama Rinpoche demonstrated that for us the other day. Just like that. Bang. Gone. And I'm sure he was well prepared for it. I'm sure, you know, and they say he's still in meditation. You know, that's how to be. Okay, gone. You're still in meditation. Your awareness hasn't changed. Okay, the conditions have changed, but you fundamentally haven't changed. Reality hasn't fundamentally changed. So that's how to be ready, just like that. So it's now. Being ready for death isn't like, oh yes, I better get everything in order, and, you know, for when I go, if I go. I suppose I will. I mean, I have seen insurance advertisements for insurance saying, if you die, it's the one thing which is not an if. It's not an if, but when is the big if. And the urgency is not to get it all done before I die. The urgency is to be in a state of mind where you're ready when you die. So that's the point. And if we have time later today, I'll go through one of Rinpoche's songs about that mind that's in a state of readiness. But I wanted to focus this morning more on the practicalities side. So although I've just said that, as if, okay, we're just focusing on the now, actually, out of consideration for the world, I could say, and out of consideration for the structure of one's connections, one does need to plan. So there is now, and there is planning, and there's attachment to outcome. So there is a way of planning that's not, that's actually inspiring. It is actually Dharma practice. It's, I think sometimes when we talk about the nature of reality is beyond any grasping, is beyond any concepts, beyond anything you can even talk about, oh, then I better stop talking. And that doesn't actually yield the result that you hope for. It just means you get stuck in your old way of thinking. You're just stuck. You might be trying not to think, but you're full of thinking, I must try not to think. It's not actually, you haven't arrived at the simplicity. Simplicity has structure. Otherwise, the world wouldn't hang together, would it? I mean, every moment would be different moments in total chaos. What relationship would it have to the moment before? Why is there any continuity? Something's continuous. So why in Buddhism do they keep saying it's not? It's impermanent. Ah, you need to think about that very deeply. It's very deep. There is some structure there. If there weren't, how would you ever reap the results of your own karma? How would you ever reap the results of anything you did, let alone, you know, a karmic result? There's some structure there. And therefore it makes sense to sense what that is. Link it to your heart wish. And we don't really have that much difficulty, really, do we? Once we've connected with our deepest vision or heart wish, and then we consider how we're going to act with our body, speech and mind, we kind of know, don't we? And we know if we're ignoring something that's presenting itself to us. That we're presented with a situation of somebody in trouble. We know the thing to do is to go and try and find out what's happening. And we know then to draw on what resources we have to do the right thing, to help the person. We automatically do that. And that, part of that is knowledge and part of it is planning, isn't it? It's better to do this thing before that thing, or this has to be done before that. If this isn't in place, then that won't be in place. We have that intelligence. We have the structure of that kind of intelligence in ourselves. Sometimes we do it even without thinking, don't we? I mean, mostly. Mostly we do it without thinking, which is good. Because if we had to think about it, I think it would get very complicated. Sometimes thinking is what we need to be doing. But most of the time, you could say, go with the flow. But what it means is that we have the intelligence to sense the right direction to move in. And then sometimes we need to think. We know thinking is the thing that needs to be done now. And if we don't think, then it shows. You know, you can see what's happened. Well, you didn't think, did you? No, I didn't think. So thinking is really important. It's what we do with our mind. It's one of the things that our mind can do. Our speech can follow and our actions can follow. Although a lot of the time, as I said, we kind of almost know with the whole of us. We almost know physically what to do sometimes. And the words come and we can't really trace that we thought it first and then said it, but it was the right thing to say. But sometimes it's a matter of giving some space and time and allowing ourselves to think clearly. That's the essential thing. So just because reality is beyond all thought, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with thinking. That somehow we have to try not to think, especially when it comes to things like death. I think a lot of people put a lot of investment in not thinking about it. And then eventually, when it hits them, they think, oh, I've been wasting my time. I've wasted so much of my time because I didn't think about the inevitability of death and suddenness. Or not necessarily suddenness. I mean, it can be a very slow and painful change. Could happen to any of us. Could happen to any of those people here, anyone we love. This long decline that ends in death. It's part of the reality of things. So, what's the point of thinking about that? To get your priorities right. You need to get your priorities right, and that's what planning is basically, isn't it? You get your priorities right. You think about the situation you're in and the likely things that are going to come up, and then you prepare for it. I was actually a Queen's Guide, and the motto of the Girl Guides is be prepared. People know. Be prepared. So I took this to heart and I thought about death and I decided to be prepared. Well, not as well as perhaps I ought to. Because then you do come to on the one side there is your state of mind, yourself, but then there is also the consideration of what you leave behind and how you leave the situation for others. And then how you live your life so that there's some kind of continuity in that. So that, the word that comes to mind is some sort of congruence between your intention, what your life is about, how you're trying to go about bringing that about, and then what everything you're doing is orientated and is congruent with that. So strangely, when we think about being busy and being when we're thinking about, what's it I was going to say? Oh yeah, taking time off. So this go together. Taking time off. Okay, so busyness or taking time off. But actually, do we really need to take time off if life is congruent? Because then it wouldn't be a matter of, oh, I'm so busy, I must stop. It would be more like, these things need to be done in order to lead the life I need to lead, in order to maintain the awareness I need at the moment of death. And yes, it requires a lot of hard work. But if it's all congruent, somehow it doesn't feel like hard work. It starts to feel like hard work when it's pulling you this way and pulling you that way, and it's not about anything. You just start to feel exhausted, and you just want to stop, just stop, just stop. But in actual fact, if your life is congruent with, this is the state of mind I wish to die in, and I might die any moment, this is how I want to, this is my priorities and what I'm trying to do, okay, I'm doing it, then okay, it takes a lot of work, that doesn't matter. I've put all my resources into it. You somehow, you don't really need to stop it or get out of it. You just are it. You just live like that. I'm often totally amazed by some of the ways some Tibetans live. The Tibetan lamas and their attendants. I particularly am struck by the attendants, maybe because that's more, I sort of think, well, if that's what the attendant is like, I've got a long way to go. Sometimes I think maybe the attendant and the lama have totally melded, so they're just the one being, because they seem to take no time for themselves. And when you ask them, well, aren't you tired? You've been working hard. You haven't stopped at any point. You're constantly dealing with everybody else's problems, but what about yours? Don't you have any time for yourself? And I get this tremendous sense of relaxation. And they're saying something like, well, I have the blessing of the Lama. And no, I don't find it difficult. No, I don't need time off. I'm doing what I want to be doing. I'm contributing and helping. Why? I don't know. What does time off mean? Oh, right. That's something to aspire to. So relaxed, really relaxed. There's a lovely story about Jigme Rinpoche, who's the brother of the Shama, His Holiness Shama Rinpoche. I remember when His Holiness the 16th Karmapa was visiting us in the Dordogne, in his seat in the Dordogne, and the Dakpo Kargiling. And there was a kind of lull in the activity, and Jigmela was standing kind of with his hands behind his back, just looking into space, looking completely relaxed. He's in charge of the whole thing, And I said, oh, you I can't remember what I said, something about how he was or something. He says, oh, I'm very busy. He didn't look busy. So I said, oh, I see, so you're taking a break, you're before getting on with it again. So, no, I'm busy right now. Wow, that's the way to be busy. very relaxed. But again, you know, he had no life of his own. He was constantly at the service of all and everybody, His Holiness and everybody who wanted to help His Holiness. And as he said once, he said, yes, from a very early age, working and helping His Holiness, people love His Holiness so much. They have such strong ideas of what would be good to do. Such strong ideas, yes, because they care. They really care. And in the meantime, everybody else is furious with him, you know. He just doesn't do what we want him to do. But then at the same time, he wasn't getting ruffled by it either. Just very. You might think, well, we don't want too many people like that around. Would anything get done? Well, it's a good question, isn't it? We have lots of people with strong ideas about how it ought to be done around, and I don't know quite what we are managing to achieve. An interesting question, isn't it? So I wanted to focus today on priorities and the vision, not just of ourselves individually, but as a Sangha. I think there's always the hope that somehow the Sangha is them and I can just kind of join in with it, but it's kind of rolling on as something that I can roll along with. And of course we hope a lot of people will do that. But it can only happen if there is actually a Sangha of committed people who are taking it forward. And will take it forward, if you like, past death, past their death, past my death, so that it still will be there. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about that. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, actually. First of all, thinking, well, is there a Sangha there in the first place? And if there is, what's going to happen when I die? And like, what is a Sangha really? And what does it mean to take refuge in the Sangha? When I was talking yesterday, I was saying you take refuge in the Buddha. That's our own true nature, our own Buddha nature, and the Buddha who has realized it and therefore can demonstrate it and can also draw us to it. And then the Dharma, which is that reality which we recognize in ourselves, we finally realize in ourselves. And then there's the Sangha, who are those practitioners and teachers who've transmitted that Dharma from one generation to the next. So the first Sangha was the disciples of the Buddha, his immediate disciples who received the realization, the transmission, passed it on, and then they had disciples and passed it on to their disciples, and it's gone on for 2,500 years. That's amazing, isn't it? And we still have teachers who can pass on that realization even now. Yeah. Even here in the West, it's like, wow. And they have students. So if it's going to go further, those students are going to have to really realize it and pass it on. So it's a bit of a terrifying thought, isn't it? Is it really going to be up to us? Well, you could say those are the Arya Sangha. Those are the true Sangha, and the reason they're the true Sangha is because they have realized the truth within themselves, which is our refuge. So that's why they are the true refuge, because of what they've realized, which is what the Buddha realized, which makes them the same as the Buddha, which makes them the same as our own Buddha nature, and therefore they can draw us to that realization, that truth beyond all suffering, the truth beyond birth and death. It's right there at the heart of the Dharma. Beyond birth and death, you have to take into consideration it's about, you have to have that mindfulness of death in order to realize what's beyond it. What's beyond it in the sense not after it, but what is not involved in it. It's not conditioned, the non-conditioned, that is not involved in the process of birth and death, conditionality. And yet it's not separate. The whole pattern of the way we manifest in the world is based on the structure of the true continuity of our being. And that's why I stress the importance of our connections, our heart connections, because those connections are what give the continuity. And if you like, the result that manifests is because of what's happening in that deep structure of our connections, our connectedness, which is, if you like, below the surface. It's not the conditionality, it's deep heart connections. So when we talk about the Sangha, we're talking about those people who've connected us from that time of the Buddha right through to this time through their heart connections. You could say it was through their, the teaching gets passed on from one generation to the next generation in a sort of conditioned, linked way, in which there can be faults. That can go wrong in various ways, and does. That's a kind of superficial way of thinking of it, but the deeper way of thinking is that each time somebody realizes the true nature of reality, they realize totality, which includes us now. So the connection between the Buddha and all those disciples who've realized the true nature of reality is actually here in our hearts. We are also integral to reality. So there's some connection there that's deeper than history. This isn't just a long history, 2,500 years. It's a heart connection that is manifesting within us, because why are we drawn to this? Why are we here? How is it we've met these teachers at this time? We've met each other. How is it we're forming a community? Because there is a deeper connection there. It doesn't just happen by chance. That's why when you find that you're participating and you're integral to this process of the Dharma being transmitted, it's like this is your chance. These are your best connections. This is the time. This is the time to make use of it and to recognize that connection so that something can emerge from it. Something can, if you like, on a practical level, can emerge from it. Those deep connections that's why the first thing in the morning we say, now is the time to think of what heart connections mean. Those connections that are deeper than life and death, birth and death. They are the connections of life itself, which are deeper than the conditionality of birth and death. And we know it in our hearts. So that would be the Sangha in a kind of whole picture, as it were. You've got the enlightened, realized disciples of the Buddha, and their realized disciples, and their realized disciples, and their realized disciples. And then you've got us, who are somehow also connected. And we are actually creating the opportunity for that enlightenment to appear in the world. I think you might be familiar with the 5 certainties, the mandala of the 5 certainties: the teacher, the time, the place, the teacher, the teaching, and the taught. They all need to be present. If there's nobody there to be taught, the teaching doesn't happen. And obviously the teaching doesn't happen without the teacher, but it only happens if there's a time and a place. So this is where the planning comes in. The time and the place might happen spontaneously, but spontaneously could also mean it's spontaneously planned as well. For some unknown reason, a group of people get together and ask for a teaching. And that's more likely to happen if they've thought about it beforehand and thought, okay, well, if we're going to have a teaching, we need to create a situation in which the teaching can happen. That there's like-minded people are gathered in the same place at the same time, going to increase the chances of the teaching happening. And that, again, if you think about it, what else needs to be in place? Well, the teacher needs to be not too busy doing other things. The teacher needs to have time to be able to be there to teach. And they're only going to be able to teach if they've had time to spend time practicing. So those conditions also need to be nurtured. And we can make choices and prioritize things in our lives so that that's more likely to happen. And if we're going to absorb the teachings, then we need to create space and time in our lives. And then we need to create space and time in which we're going to practice. And if we're going to practice, one of the things that's vital to the spiritual path is that you're communicating with other practitioners, spiritual friendship, so that you've got some opportunity to check your understanding, to share your understanding, to refine your understanding. And there's nothing like it than actually dialogue, talking with other people who are open and ready to engage in a deep way, in a genuine way. So anything we do that's conducive to bringing that about is part of the whole Heart Connections project, if you like. You could call it a mandala, a structure. I've talked about a structure, this mandala structure that is not always visible what it is completely. Sometimes there's something quite intangible about why certain people come together at a certain time and certain place. And yet when you look, you can see there's almost a kind of inevitability about it. But at the same time, if there's not commitment to it, it can just fall apart again very easily. So yesterday I was talking about how enlightenment comes about through commitment, through having a clear vision of where you're going, and then committing yourself to it, and making the pranidhanas, making these strong aspirations, keeping your word, following it through. In the end, with the right connections, you arrive at awakening. You realize your own true nature. And so do those around you, so does the whole community, so does generations to come, so things happen in the whole universe that you're not even aware of because of the way things are connected. So I want you today to think about that in terms of what we're trying to do as a Sangha here in the West at this time. Taking refuge in the Arya Sangha, those awakened beings, taking refuge in our teachers, our mentors, people who we consider to be more further along the path than we are. Probably those are the people that are going to help us most, because we'll have most contact with them, and they understand, our particular difficulties at any particular time. And then there's the Sangha in terms of, it's interesting, a vehicle or a body of people or something. If you were, for example, if you were in the Far East, you would probably think of Sangha as being a monastic Sangha, that there would be committed people, wearing special outfit, keeping special rules, keeping a special way of life, a very dedicated, disciplined way of life, completely given to Dharma practice. They would have a monastery, a place where they lived, and they would have support. The people who weren't monastics would see it as their practice, their contribution to support the monastics. So, okay, we're here in the West and we're not monastics. And Khenpo Rinpoche, when he was telling me how to set up this Sangha, he said, not monastics. It's not the time for monastics. And not entirely for, oh, isn't it a pity, but actually rather good. Every way of life has its drawbacks, and the monastic life has its drawbacks, various drawbacks. Perhaps not so obvious as you might think, but I think the most obvious one for us is support. They're dependent on others to support them, and sometimes other people want from them what is not really what they really feel in their hearts they should be doing. But they do it anyway, because that's the way the whole monastery gets support. You read that in the lives of some of the great teachers in Tibet, that they were very caught up in the affairs of the monastery, because trying to get support, going out to get support for the monastery. So it is a problem. You can't say, oh, well, wouldn't it be nice if we were supported, then we could practice all day. But then you look in monasteries and they're such busy places, people can't really put time aside for their reflection and study. They are as busy as worldly people, working to help the people who are supporting them, doing for them what they want. So it's not a perfect model. I mean, sometimes it works, and it's brilliant when it does, but it doesn't always. So in a non-monastic Sangha, we've all got to do everything ourselves, haven't we? We've got to support ourselves and find time for study and practice. It is possible. We've got to really believe that. And we've also got to believe that whatever work we're doing is also an opportunity for practice. So it's not like formal practice is the only practice. I mean, we can practice all day long from the moment we get up. We can practice in terms of our aspiration, our commitment, in terms of generosity, discipline, patience, the energy that comes from that, applying ourselves, the focus, remaining always focused on our main aim, and keeping true to that, and then the wisdom that arises when we do have time to reflect, study and meditate, and that starts to come alive, and we can then start carrying that over into our lives. So there's not a moment of the day when you can't be practicing full on. And if you've integrated, if you've thought beforehand and made sure that everything you're doing is congruent, you've got loads of energy. The virya becomes very, very strong. And even you can think of as patience as a kind of energy. Patience isn't gritting your teeth and holding tight. Patience is a very freed up energy. If you get your priorities right, you get your orientation right, then whatever happens, it becomes Dharma. So it's actually very energizing, very relaxing. You might think, well, you're just lying there not doing anything. Yes, but the way I'm not doing anything, it can be very, very powerful. So not to be underestimated. So we're a non-monastic Sangha. So I said to Kempo Rinpoche, well, how is that going to be? He said, well, part of the time you'll be practicing meditation and study, and then part of the time you'll be practicing austerities. Usually in the Far East, the idea is that the austerity is when you're sitting in meditation retreat, and then the rest of the time is like distraction from that. But he turned it around on its head. The austerity was not being in retreat, because it's kind of, it involves a lot of things that you don't really want to do. Whereas when you're in retreat, you're doing what you want to do. And I thought, yeah, that's right. So practicing austerities by earning a living and looking after the community and doing Dharma work and things like that. So then each person will have their own balance. Some people will maybe do a week, a year of retreat. Sometimes some people might do half a day, a month of retreat. Some people might do 3 years retreat, or 10 years, or their whole life in retreat. It'll be different for each person, but everybody's practicing on the same, with the same intensity. I thought that was a very nice model. Then I asked him, well, how do you organize that? It's a Mahayana Sangha. We're not monastics. He said, well, that's what you'll have to work out. You'll have to find a way to do it. So, well, the last 12, I don't know, a few decades, I suppose, I've been trying to work out how to do it. It's like herding cats. You get people who are really inspired by the Dharma, and they come along and you feel they're really connected with it, and then they're not there. Sometimes for perfectly legitimate reasons that you can really understand. They've got other calls on their time, and sometimes you cannot make it out, and sometimes it's because, as Jigmina said, they do have very strong ideas. Lots of very strong ideas. Gets very frustrating. It's like, something has to give somewhere. So whose idea are we going with? I mean, you have this big ideal and you have this big project to create a vehicle for bringing the Dharma into the world and bringing the true, genuine transmission into the world. But there's so many ways you could go about it. And, whose idea is going to be the one? We've got to we've got to have some sort of decision-making process. And people say, oh, I don't like organization. I don't want anything to do with organization. That's most people. But on the other hand, I wanted to do what I wanted to do. Which is, yes, it's funny when you say it like that, isn't it? It can be quite difficult. I don't think there's anyone who's ever tried to do anything in this life doesn't know what I'm talking about. It happens in every walk of life. So somehow there has to be clarity about how the whole thing is structured, which is very difficult when the people who've come together have come together from a distance. And the Discovering the Heart of Buddhism course is excellent in the sense that by the time people have engaged with it, when we do get together, we really are the kind of people who want to get together and talk about it. It's a negative filter for people who perhaps are looking for something else. Like maybe they want a more intellectual approach or something like that. But if you've got this far, you want to talk about the experience in a very genuine way. And that makes it possible for us to go very deep very quickly, and it works very well from that point of view. But the other thing is you all come from very far away. Not everybody, but that's the drawback. But the good news is there's so much that can be done from a distance these days. Thanks to technology and technicians and willing technicians, people who are willing to put the work and energy and imagination into it, there are ways that we can actually link together. So now the challenge is how to make that so that we are genuinely connecting and we're meeting face to face enough to make that meaningful. And I think it can be done. And over the last, I don't know how many years, 10 years, nearly, we've been working to try to define what is the core heart of the Awakened Heart Sangha, so that there's lots of people can come, and if you like, oh, it's there, I can join in, I can go along with it and benefit from it. But there is at least a group or a strong enough core of people who are it, as it were, and whose ideas are the ones that are thought through together and share a common vision, common values, and take the thing forward. And the following at the moment my leadership, but I'm not always going to be there, and you don't know how long I'm going to be here, you know. So when I go pop or what's going to be what's going to be left? What are you going to do? How are you going to pick up the pieces? Who's going to pick up the pieces? Because there'll still be a lot left. You know, there'll be the stupa, there'll be this place, there'll be whatever assets we have, but more importantly, there'll be all the resources we've gathered. You've got the material resources in terms of the teachings, the transcripts, the written materials, but even more importantly, you've got teachers, you've got mentors, you've got people who are experienced and who've actually followed through the teachings that I've been giving and now are embodying them and working together. This is quite a resource. And how rare is that in the world? You know, how rare in the West? How many sanghas like that are there? Especially sanghas that are actually Western. You see, you've got a new generation of Tibetan lamas and their followers, which, I'm not saying I'm not one of them, but those Tibetans are going to create their own sanghas, and they will have their own style. And personally, I find it very difficult to find, and maybe it's not possible to find, it's not possible to find a person who, except maybe Trungpa Rinpoche, but even then, somebody who is Western has the same problems and the same outlook. If you haven't experienced that, you can't quite get it. I think it's quite hard to get what it's like to have no faith in anything at all. I don't think any of the Tibetan teachers or anybody from the East even that I've met who can quite imagine what it's like to have no faith at all in anything, hardly. And yet have a great longing for truth and a great longing and a very strong value put on love and compassion. And yet really not sure if you believe in anything. What that does in terms of how you can talk about that. And I do feel with the Discovering the Heart of Buddhism, we found a way of talking about that. That we do have confidence in something, in faith. We do have faith in something, but we're not sure what it's called. You know, we can't say straight off, oh yes, the Buddha, wow. Maybe some of us, but maybe some of us, I'm not sure. Looks a bit foreign. You know. I don't want to belong to a funny sect. I want to be mainstream. So I think there's a lot to be said for being taught by somebody from your own culture. And that there aren't many Sanghas yet who have that structure. And one of the other problems, I think, is that Tibetan teachers keep quite strongly to the idea of there's three vehicles, the Hinayana, Mahayana and Vajrayana. And the Vajrayana is the best and the most important one, and of course that's what everybody wants to practice. And then the small print is Vajrayana is for those with very sharp spiritual faculties, and they're very rare. And the kind of faith you need is very rare and very difficult to come by. And it's only for those with those very special qualities. So what is it that we're given when we go for a weekend on Vajrayana teachings and transmissions? What are they then? Is that everybody who's turned up at that weekend have these sharp faculties and this deep faith? Something else is going on. And you know, there's a long story about what's going on. I mean, I'm not questioning their integrity, but it is a long. There's all sorts of what can you say? All sorts of things going on there that are kind of cultural and kind of true, but not the only way you could go about something. But nonetheless, you could do it that way. It gives a connection. But on the other hand, you wouldn't have to do it that way because you'd get a connection anyway without having called it Vajrayana, when in fact it's a kind of external form of it that isn't quite it yet. Okay, so there's a lot of flexibility in that. And what I've found is it's not really necessary to talk about three vehicles. The Buddha originally didn't talk about three vehicles because everything was quite simple. And then the three vehicles emerged historically as, you know, correctives for things that had developed and then needed more adjustment. And 2,500 years of adjustment have left things looking a bit more complicated than I think they need to. And I think in the West, we need a very strong, sort of straightforward message. And all the practices that are called Hinayana, all the practices called Mahayana, all the practices called Vajrayana, at whatever level of exotericism or esotericism they are, they're all important, they all contribute to the same end. So let's get the end straight, get where we are straight, get our own priorities straight, and then we can start thinking about more sophisticated things that have, you know, grown up over time. So that's the character of this Sangha, and I'm hoping it will carry on because it's been a lot of work and it would be a shame if it went out with me. So I have great hope that when I'm working with you, I'm thinking, I'm working with you now and it's a lot of work, but if the Dharma is going to come in the West, someone's got to do this work to establish it. So I really hope it's going to work long term, because it is such a lot of work. You know, I think you've all heard of the I don't know where it comes from, but the 4 words of forming, storming, norming, performing. They're brilliant. I don't know where they come from. Do you know where they come from? What?
A man called Tuckman.
Tuckman.
Yeah,
Oh.
1960 something.
1960 something. 1940 something, right. But it's so true. It's so true. You come together with such great ideals and hopes. You think it's going to be straightforward and easy. And then, as I said, as Steve Miller said, you know, everybody's got their strong idea and, you know, their own strategy, and something's got to be decided there, and it's until it's decided, it's a storm. It's different people's ideas coming and hitting up against each other, and, you know, let's go this way, let's go that way, and it's lots of, and then you realize, oh, that's not going to work. We need to norm. We need to decide which way we're going, and, you know, we all get on together and we all share the same vision, and then we pull and we'll go forward instead of So this is the norming, and the good news is I think we've done well with our norming. I think we've got a good start to the norming. So we're hoping that now we can do the performing. Well, we've been doing the performing as well as the norming and storming for years, but I think the balance is getting so that I think we have a stronger sense of the core of the Sangha and their values and how they're working together. And you might have heard of already, we call them the Srimala Gana. Is everyone familiar with that? You've heard of it vaguely? So anyway, we do have some Srimala Gana members here, which is Yeshe, Tara, Dashu, Pema. That's it, I think. Yeah. There's only 8 anyway, so that's half of them are here. So what I'm hoping is when we've finished speaking, that you'll have a chance to talk to them about, the whole process of norming, but it'll probably mean you hear a bit about the process of forming and storming, and kind of get an appreciation of the work that's been done over the last decade, I suppose, maybe not quite that long. And then where we are hoping to move from there into being able to deliver a clearer vision to everybody who joins the Sangha, and the opportunity to go through that process, but maybe not quite so difficult now, because at least we know where we're going, of joining a training group that you can connect to more strongly than perhaps you've been able to before, because there hasn't been quite such a clear opportunity before. And in fact, it's still not entirely clear, because we haven't finished the writing it all down, you could say. Everybody needs, at each level they're at, whatever level of engagement you are in the Sangha, you need something to tell you, well, here you are, this is what's open to you, this is what the possibilities are for you. So you'd need just something short to say that, but then that needs to fit into a bigger overall vision, which takes quite a lot of time to get that exactly right. But I think we're almost there. So there will be much more clarity in future about how to engage with the Sangha and take your own training forward in a like the message is that there is the essential essence of the Dharma, which is we discover in ourselves, and the emphasis is on formless practice and on the principles in discovering the heart of Buddhism. And actually, that's already a lot. So there may be many people who that's how they want to relate to this Sangha, and I want us to be able to make that possible, because it's already a lot. And there's many ways that could be taken forward, and those students could be helped to link together more and practice for the rest of their life in that way. But that would depend on there being, if you like, senior students or more committed students who can, well, maybe not more committed, but some kind of structure to support them. Maybe that could be organised in a particular way, which is. But then there's there's trusting the heart of Buddhism, and there's living the awakened heart. Is everyone familiar with the booklet, Living the Awakened Heart? Not everybody. Right. So again, that gives an overview of how you might integrate those discovering the heart of Buddhism principles into the wider context of the Buddhist teachings, the Buddhist tradition, various practices that are available. that you might find actually are very helpful. They all come to the same point, but there are different ways in that that are standard practices, especially in Mahayana Buddhism, that you could use, and even could be Vajrayana practices that you might want to kind of use at some point. But it depends how much time you have in your life. I mean, maybe it's enough. DHB and formless practices may be enough, and that's that is the way you're going to practice. But I've inherited this rich tradition from the Tibetan tradition. Even the Mahayana alone is extremely rich. So I have, over the years, been working through quite systematically various teachings so that materials are available. But then what students need is some help and structure to engage with it in a way that isn't overwhelming. Because, if you've just got lots and lots of teachings coming in, at the end of the day, where are you going to focus and who are you going to talk to about it? So that needs to be structured more. And so this core group is, trying to firm up how to best use the resources we have, and especially the human resources we have, to help as many people as we can to whatever level they're needing. But obviously, it's all going to depend on what human resources we have, and we need to be realistic about that. But if we lay the foundation well, I think of it as being like planting a seed. If all the elements that are needed are there and functioning, it might just be a little seed and a little shoot, but who knows? When you apply the right conditions, it might just take off. It could any time. Could be like a century after I've died. Who knows? It has happened in the past, in the history of Buddhism, that a teacher has had very few students and not had much reputation at all. But a few hundred years later, one of his students suddenly says, on the basis of that, it's the right time, place, and it becomes a major tradition. So you never know. So I feel like, okay, we're getting this seed, so it's a perfect seed. It's got everything in it. It could just take off. Maybe it'll just be small, and who knows what benefit that might bring. But maybe it will at some point really blossom and become quite a major contribution to Dharma in the West, which would be a wonderful thing to have been part of, wouldn't it? So, yes, so that I'm trying to bring the two themes together, the theme of death and the theme of Sangha and taking refuge in the Sangha. And there were a few points I wanted to make about the Awakened Heart Sangha and our death, and how practically there's things that we do as a Sangha to help at the time of death. For each of us, when we die, if other Sangha members know about it, then we will all be able to do prayers and dedication and accumulate punya and dedicate it for you, or for your loved ones. And that these days, the way that people link it is to send names to the hermitage, and we put the names on the hermitage dedication list. But that could be organised even more extensively so that everybody got those names, or we could have a system by means of which you could also make an offering at that time to add to the power of that dedication. So that whole idea could become much stronger, and it could be spread beyond the hermitage to the whole Sangha. That's one area where we might do more. The other thing is, people can make, that's all part of the same idea, I think. The other thing is that we're about to, we've already started, the memorial garden, which is for people's ashes. so that there's the opportunity for people to leave their own ashes there, or the ashes of loved ones, so that there's a sense of that connection being made with the Dharma, with the stupa. It's not quite on the same site because it's like beside the stupa. But when you think about it, that means when people think of their loved ones, or they maybe come to visit or remember them, and they come to the place where the stupa is, they're also making a connection with the Dharma. For that whole personal mandala, there is that very strong connection with the Dharma then. So I think that's quite meaningful and powerful. And then maybe there's other things you can think of. I was very moved, actually, a couple of days ago, talking to David and Caroline. As you know, David was very seriously ill earlier this year, and we didn't know whether he was going to live or die, or whether he would, ever be able to walk or talk again. It was like terrible. And I was able to ask his Khenpo Rinpoche to do a blessing for him, and it was very moving. I showed him the picture of David, and when he looked at it, he went and started praying very hard with his hands on the picture. But you could tell that he knew that this was a very serious moment. And David was saying how deeply it had affected him. We think about death and impermanence all the time. I mean, hopefully, as good Buddhists we do. We've heard it many times. It's kind of like obvious. But actually, when such a thing happens to you, the illusion that this is a solid world that's going to carry on like this is shattered. There's these great gaps where it is illusion, actually. You cannot rely on it in a way that perhaps if you haven't been through such a strong experience, although it's somehow here, it hasn't really gone in. And Caroline was saying something very similar. And both of them were saying how very supportive they found. I think they found their whole mandala of friends and family, but the Sangha in particular, they found that was very, very, very moved by that, and very, maybe to some extent surprised by how important that had been for them at that time. And I think that's something, again, that we can take to heart and realize, okay, this is something we can be there for each other and help each other through those times, even just by continuing our practice and sending our good wishes, and in a way reminding people that there is something that is outside of the conditionality of the birth and death, and that we're there with them, with that connection, that very deep heart connection with that. And there is power in that. There is no doubt about it. It's a power that's not in time, it's not in space, it's not conditioned, and it's our hearts. So it's real. And in fact, if you wonder, well, how do I know? Well, if you look at everything else that you're taking to be real, and you think about it enough, you realize it isn't real. So you've only got this left. And why should it not be real? What is there about it that's not real? It's just this. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a kind of intuition at the moment. You haven't got much stability. You haven't got much conviction, but there is that intuition there. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. And that brings me to the last point I was going to make, which is that traditionally, if you're thinking about death and impermanency, or even your motive for practicing Dharma, in the Tibetan tradition in particular, they stress the four thoughts. You'll know the four thoughts. Precious human birth, impermanence, karma, suffering. The only difficulty with it is that the way they reflect on it assumes that you have a Buddhist worldview, cosmic view, of many lifetimes and the karma from this life ripening in a future life. And then because of that cosmic view, being in a position to recognize this life is really not important compared with the whole picture. Like this life isn't important at all in that sense. But there's, together with that, there is, so they stress the fear element. But together with that, there is the fearlessness. And we have to get that conviction first, or at least in balance. Because if you just tell people, well, you could die any time, and because of your karma, you could end up in hell tomorrow. Well, it's not very, first of all, it's not very convincing. And secondly, it's really not very encouraging, because you don't really have much faith that you could do anything about it. So I think it takes a long time before we as Westerners are going to be motivated from just those particular way of contemplating it, because I think first we need more conviction in the whole Buddhist cosmic view, and I think probably we'll end up extending the Buddhist cosmic view, or somehow representing it, not watering it down, but perhaps opening it up more so that we can understand it better in terms of our own Western culture and scientific discoveries and things like that. That it's I don't think we'd be watering it down, but we'd probably make it even more astonishing. I don't think you can, actually. The Buddhist view is already so astonishing, because it takes everything to the nth degree, distance, size, time, complexity, like it's totality. It's an amazing view. But until you've got that, I think just thinking to yourself, well, I have this precious human birth, one has to kind of focus on something more obvious, like, well, how many people do have the opportunity of really meeting Dharma people they can talk to about Dharma, receive teaching live, talking to a teacher, who are actually motivated enough to find the time and the energy to apply those teachings in their lives? How often, how much is that actually happening? And how come I'm doing it? And am I really doing it? And could I do it? Am I really taking advantage of this opportunity I've been given? I think it's well worth thinking about that. And then, having thought about it, how can I help others to have the same opportunity? How can I communicate it better? So I think there is a lot of, you could think about it in those terms, and then realize the special way of thinking about impermanence here is that these conditions are not here indefinitely. We tend to think, oh, well, I'll look at that next week. It's like when you live in a city and you never go and visit those special places, because you can always do it next week. So really sort of be the tourist and get it all done and take advantage while you're here, because you don't know. I mean, maybe you've no idea how long those conditions are going to be together, let alone death might come. I mean, any condition can change and make it impossible at any time. So that sense of urgency, as I said, you can be relaxed and you can have that confidence. You don't have to be fearful. I think that's the main point here. You can think about death and impermanence might come tomorrow, not to scare yourself, but to live more more fully. You can think about conditions aren't going to stay like this forever, not to kind of scare yourself, but because what is the state of mind I need to be in so that I can take full advantage of what's happening now and what might be my situation tomorrow. And then the idea of karma, the way that it's traditionally emphasized is in terms of the 6 realms, of which I find totally credible. And I'm sure there's 6 is an underestimate, but it's a nice classification of possibilities. But the key point really is we can do something about it. It is going to depend on what we do and the intention behind what we do. So getting that vision clear, putting your energy and commitment into what you're doing in a Dharma way will definitely bring about a Dharmic result. And you need real conviction in that. And that anything you do that isn't that will have a non-Dharmic result. It's going to make it more difficult for you to practice Dharma. And it's already difficult enough. You know, it's not going to get better by engaging in non-Dharmic pursuits. It's going to get better by engaging in it, even if you're not doing it very well. I think there's a tendency for people to feel bad about themselves. I'm not practicing very well, so I won't practice. You know, there's some meanness in my generosity, so I won't give anything. You know, and so on. You know, like when I sit in meditation, I'm distracted, so I won't sit in meditation. Yeah. I'll just go and be even more distracted, and it goes on, doesn't it? So we really need that strong conviction that, okay, if my intention is dharmic, it will have a dharmic effect, even if the way I'm doing it doesn't meet my standards of, you know, what I would consider, you know, generosity or patience or whatever. But my intention is that. And therefore it will have an effect. And that's what the conviction in karma does for you. And also, together with that, you need to have conviction that your intention and your counter-intention have power. So when you see you've done something that you think, yeah, that's not it, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to do that. That counteracts it. I'm sorry I did that. I'm sorry I didn't do better, and I'm going to do better. That has power. You know, to really believe that intention to do better has power. So you don't have to then think, there's no point in thinking that because you thought it before and nothing happened. You think, no, I obviously haven't done it enough. I'll just do it more. I'll just intend better more. You know, okay, it doesn't matter how many times I fail because I believe eventually this will win over because that is how karma works. So that's the sort of principle of karma that you need to have conviction about. And maybe that doesn't come straight away. You know, you need to kind of, over time perhaps. And then finally, suffering. And this is really the conviction that everything conditioned falls apart and is meaningless. And there is a non-conditioned. So that last one only works if you have conviction in the non-conditioned. So that's where I start with people, because I think in the West we're not sure about that. First we need to have some conviction that there is a non-conditioned nature to our being that can be discovered. Then I can look at everything I'm attached to and realize it's conditioned, it's useless. And then the non-conditioned shines through. And it shines through straight away. This is the good news. Even people you meet who are happy, you can be sure if they're happy, they're not attached to conditioned things. You can be sure, you know. They'll say, well, you know, I don't worry about it because, you know, we'll be dead tomorrow anyway, or yeah, tomorrow's another day, or, you know, well, why fret about things that don't really matter? They would definitely have an attitude like that if they're happy. So, you know, it's already starting. It just follows through. They're the two sides of the same thing. You don't have to be very sophisticated philosophically, because it happens naturally when you realize that the conditioned is not reliable, not worth any worrying about, then naturally the non-conditioned starts to shine through. You cheer up. It improves your sense of humour. So what I'd like you to talk about is to get together with the Shimalagana people, and maybe you want to ask some questions. And oh yes, Yishi's reminding me that I wanted to talk about Sherab, the student support person.
We cannot be a department.
Person. So since last year, we've had Sherab working very hard on the vision. Yes, he wants you to look at the camera.
I'm smiling at the camera. The camera is smiling back.
Right. So Sherab has been working very hard to try to get to grips with all the work that we've been doing over the last 10 years to form the Sangha, and prepare the documentation that we need. We need we're preparing a document that's called, at the moment, called a lifetime of practice. LOP for short. And anyone who's ever had to prepare a document will know that it's all in the detail. It takes, you get the rough thing out in a few weeks, and then and then it takes really a long time to work through all the details so that it provides clarity rather than further confusion. Even deciding on what we call things, or when things start and when they end, or where the edges of things are, and how they fit together. Quite things that we've been working with for years without any documentation. But if we're going to really firm it up, it needs to, and it needs a lot of understanding, because often, if you've been around a long time, you've taken a lot of things for granted that everybody knows, and you don't realise people coming in new don't know that, and so don't know why you're saying that, and they might, So it's been really good because relatively new. But not that new. You've at least 5 years, aren't you?
It feels longer.
Yeah, feels longer. So anyway, he's been working really hard, and you've probably had contact with him one way or another anyway, because he deals with all the student contact issues and procedures with the help of Anne.
I'm the first woman.
She's the first woman, yes. So, with his partner Anne. So that's very nice to have them both there in Brighton. So he will also be there, and he's been looking into the details of this for a long time. So, anything you want to start discussing, you've got these people to discuss it with, and you'll be quite interested probably to find, even they're not clear yet. And I want you to discuss, what did we decide in the end? Was it this vision thing? Yes. Yes, it was the vision, mission, aim. And I've made copies of it, so that there should be enough each, and if not, you can make copies. And just really talk about anything you want to talk about what I said this morning. And but do pursue this idea of how Sangha in the West can and could be, how it could contribute to you, how you could contribute to it. So I should be very interested in what comes out of the discussion, because we've got another few days coming where the Mahayana Gana is going to be. The Mahayana Gana are those who are moving towards Srimalagana, or maybe they're just going to stay there. They're going to form the main body of practitioners. So that would include new people and people quite senior people who are not quite Srimalagana, but nonetheless very committed. So it'll be the main body of the committed Sangha. So we're going to have a few days meeting about it and talk about how to open that up more to new people. So I'll leave you with that. I've talked too long. Sorry. Talk through your break. Oh, yes, thank you, Tara. That was one of the other things I was going to say, that around the Sangha and death, we have this talk once a year. We have the Sangha celebration, and then we talk about on the theme of death. Or then I did promise you a talk on the nowness of death, didn't I? And I've got a song prepared that I might have time to give you later today about that. But we do think about people who've died during the course of the year, and names, we put the names on the shrine, and then when it's the solstice, which is shortly after, we burn the names and we make dedication for those people who've died. So it's good that people who come here can put their names on, but of course there could be people who send them in future years.
Let's mention as well that we've got a few we'll do later for the Buddhism Connect people.
Right.
Been donating.
So there are people who've been donating, so that a candle, is it for the stupa, or whatever they want to donate, and they've donated some money too, haven't they? Yeah.
6 months worth of tea lights.
Right, 6 months of tea lights have been donated, right. So those we'll be lighting those, and we'll be doing the butter lamp offering later today. I'm not quite sure when we can fit it in, after lunch, okay. So we will be doing that and reading out those names. And so if you want to put any names on this piece of paper, here it is. Does anyone?
I'll come and get it.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so it's discussion time. We dedicate this punya to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings realize complete and perfect awakening. May the heart's awareness awaken in the unawakened. Where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken fully. Chanju samne rinpoche macha panam jeje jeba nyamba mapadam kone kondu pawasho. Chanju samne rinpoche macha panam jeje jeba nyamba mapadam kone kondu pawasho. Chanju samne rinpoche macha panam jeje jeba nyamba mapadam kone kondu pawasho. So bye-bye anyone who's still there. And I hope you have a good discussion.
This afternoon.
Are they? Oh wow, that's keen.